Joel, welcome back to the invisible path, man.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Do you need to get that?
The squeaking door? No, I'm good.
Yeah.
I've got an old cat in my lap right now. He's
Oh, heck
his
yes.
his name is Monkey, and so he might let out a terrifying old cat meow at some point. But
Oh,
he
we could only hope.
no, don't try to get him in. It's fine. He's fine. Yeah, Monkey's my wife's like, "Are you sure you want him in your lap?" It's like, yeah, Monkey's gonna go along for the ride
Heck
here.
yeah.
So
Heck yeah.
yeah. He
Oh.
just wants affection all the time. That's all he wants. So
That's
he's very
fair,
persistent
man.
with it.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah, it's amazing.
We all really if you think
Yeah.
about it, right? That's what we all want. We all want affection all the time.
Yeah.
That's like what is motivating us to do most of the things we do, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah. He's just unfiltered. He just doesn't care. Like,
Yeah.
what, you're doing something? I don't care. Let's do this right now, all the time. So I honor that in his advanced years here. So
Heck yeah.
that's probably what's keeping him alive so long.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, there's that Tim Ferriss is probably 4 Hour Body, but maybe it wasn't 4 Hour Body. I don't know. I feel like 4 Hour Body was the one that I spent the most time with, where he talks about I think it's an island of Japan where there's a remarkably long lifespan. And there's like three factors, which is essentially like having a life purpose, having someone you love, and something else. Eating real food, probably, but I don't remember what it actually was. The one that always stuck with me was having a purpose, because I do think that you can see as that like purpose goes away, right? How quickly people's mental capacities decline, and everybody has this like super dream of, oh, I want to retire when I'm 30, and I wonder for a lot of people if that would actually be true, if they would be 2 months in and they would hate their lives more than they can possibly imagine with nothing to actually proactively do. And I wonder how many people would be in that situation, would then completely take the idea of retirement out and just do things all the time that could be done for financial reward, that they're now doing in exchange for not financial reward.
Yeah. So to take this back to the blue zones, which you mentioned, which are these areas where there's a lot of longevity and to retirement, to bring those two things together, they say that the two most dangerous days of your life are the day that you're born and the day that you retire. And so, because they're both a crisis in a sense for some people. I mean, if you don't know what the heck you're going to do, and you've lived your whole life going through the motions in some sort of job, whatever, and that's really all you have going on, and you don't have that purpose, as you mentioned, that's a real crisis. And so, what a damn shame, but that can happen to people. And so, let's not do that. Let's find something better to do and find some kind of purpose and some sort of thing to do, even if it's maybe trivial or maybe even mundane. But if it floats your boat and if it motivates you, then why not, right?
Yeah, purpose could be defined in so many ways, right? It's like, whatever it is, if it has meaning to you, as long as there's meaning left in something to you, it can really drive you, and it can really motivate you, and it really can't be mundane, right? Like from an outside subjective perspective, something may feel mundane, but if a person is really deeply motivated by the thing that they're doing, if it's sweeping the floor, remarkable.
Yeah. I knew you were going to take it to some kind of Zen place. Yeah, like the butcher whose knife never becomes dull because he is so swift and adept at moving that blade through the joints and not over the bone. So,
okay, so let's jump into a quick question, which is a deep question. We had a bunch of questions this week, but I only did this one. Came in from I don't know. I apologize for whoever this came from, but I did not write your name down. So most apologies on the upfront side. Uh, the question is, there are some profoundly strange things going on in the world right now. What does the future look like to you? Is it better or worse? If it's worse, is there anything we can do as individuals? And I assume to make it better.
I don't know.
So that was my
Right? That's
that's
an
why I
easy
did this.
question.
My question, my answer was also, man, I don't know. It's hard to know what can be done as individuals aside from uh, reframing the way you're viewing things. I think there is a desire right now to divide and an intellectual approach to things, right? As we our mind is really designed for dissecting and analyzing things, and if we take away division and you start to look at solutions as all encompassing, um, and you start to view your perspectives as uh, universal or really truly combining. um, I think there is something to that. There's a necessity for that now. That it really feels like there's a necessity for that. So my answer is I have no idea, but I do think that when we are looking at the problems that are affecting things right now, if your solution is involves dividing, it is very unlikely that we're going to get to a better place.
Absolutely. So it's such a tricky thing because we're always looking for the risks. We're looking for the tiger in the bushes. And that keeps us alive. And so the tiger in the bushes today are these like Nassim Taleb talks about this in Anti-Fragile. I mean, you have these like high risk, low probability black swan type events. We have like up west of Seattle a little bit, there's the Trident nuclear submarine base with something like 1,200 nuclear warheads. So we have like risks like that. Then we have CRISPR, which is democratizing the ability to cook up any kind of organism you want. If you have maybe $5,000 worth of lab equipment and a garage, and maybe access to YouTube or something to learn how to do this. So that's a terrifying high risk, maybe low probability, but like high stakes event. There are all these things like that, but then you have all of these good things happening as well. The ability for these technologies to be used to wipe us out versus to advance us forward, it's just a stunning thing, like looking at that risk versus reward. One thing I think about also is that we're living in a time that has been remarkably stable, I think, in a lot of ways, if you're living in like the developed or Western world. I mean, we had, since the end of World War II till now, it's just been a period of incredible growth and stability for a lot of people on the planet. And that is, I would say, probably an unusual thing and maybe an anomaly. And so if things do get a little bit wonky, do you think on the whole that humans are good or bad? And maybe it's the collective actions of all of us that really are going to spell out the future and what that holds for us in this great drama. And it's hard to know, like, are we in control of this thing? Is it destiny? is it free will? Like, what is it exactly? We're going to find out, I suppose. It's up to each of us, I suppose, to at least pretend maybe like we play a part in it. And we should probably play an okay part in it, or at least not a bad part.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, yeah, if you can reduce your individual negative impact on the world around you, you can certainly make an impact. I mean, there is no doubt. And I think, so you did a beautiful job of getting us there. This is the topic this week. The topic this week is free will. So I want to ask you, you just touched on this pretty deeply anyway, but what is, Joel, what is free will?
This I think this was your episode idea,
Yes.
not mine. Why am I answering your question? No, I'm just
Okay,
kidding.
let me ask it a different way. Joel, what is free will to you?
No, hang on. What I want to get to first, though, is it's free will versus what, right? Is it versus fate? Is it versus like us just having essentially no free will and no control?
Yeah.
It does seem a bit like a false dichotomy, right? It's an interesting thing, this whole question of free will. There's a lot to unpack there. And if I answered the whole thing in this first question, then we'd be done, right? So we can't do that because clearly I have the answer. I'm just hiding it. No, just so I'm trying to think back to like my first memories of this in childhood. Like when you first mentioned this as something we should explore, I thought back to my parents taking me and my brother to like a Chinese restaurant in Michigan in the Midwest, and you'd have this paper placemat in front of you, and it was the Chinese zodiac. Yep. And there were these 12 animals, and you'd look for your birth date, and there it was. I'm the snake, and the snake is. I took some notes on it. I looked back. I found what I remember to be the original placemat for my childhood on the old interwebs. So the snake, wise, intense, vain, attracted to physical beauty, high-tempered, and then the boar is your enemy, and then I don't know, the rat or whatever is who you should marry, right? So like implanted from early childhood was this thought that maybe you're not really in control of who you are, what your temperaments are, and maybe it's all fated on something as arbitrary as what year you were born in, and that's sort of it's an absurd thing, but it is interesting to examine how much control you actually have, and what parts of you are impulsive, and maybe to think about at some point in your life, where do those impulses come from?
Yeah. So I think, I think there's some really interesting things that you started there. I've also discovered that this is a very, very sensitive topic for people. And it's interesting because it feels like such a benign idea to me, or immaculately important, but also I can't find the controversy within it. So I'm not even smart enough, capable enough to know where I should be like delicate and sensitive. So I just like, I do not understand how this is a sensitive topic, and therefore I don't have the capability of being sensitive about it. So I'll just like preemptively apologize for however I have offended you. Just know that I'm not attempting to offend anyone. It's just that I don't understand it. But I also think the topic of free will like deeply and fully digs in and explains the depths of the things that are like actively tearing the fabric of society apart right now. So I think it's an important, like, on one hand, I'm like, hey, this topic is super important. And super valuable. And on the other hand, I'm like, but I don't understand how it's sensitive at all. And I understand that there is a broken dichotomy of ideas there that cannot really be integrated. But that is kind of where my start point is. So I have realized in thinking about this topic pretty deeply, and like I mentioned last time when we did post show and we were kind of talking about what we were going to talk about, is I've brought this up in previous conversations on the podcast, and people have been very sensitive to talk about it. So I'm grateful that you are. But what I've realized is this idea of free will. If I can get this my understanding out to the world, which is not something I normally do with these podcasts. Like normally with these podcasts, I'm just like exploring things. So this is very different in that I'm actually trying, like I actively want to have people understand this thought process that I have, because I think it's really valuable. And that's unique for the podcast. But what I've realized is a meta theory. And I'll explain my version of meta theory because I don't know what actual meta theories are. I never looked that up. But for me, a meta theory is something that can explain, essentially provide answers for all relevant applications, so that anything I apply this to, it will logically explain where we are and what's going on in the world. And I think, what's interesting is all of those astrology and human design and the Chinese zodiac, like all of those things are essentially a topic that we've had, which is the fourth turning, generational ideologies. These are all components of an explanation that free will does not exist, right? That there are things beyond our capacity that are determining things. So as you called out, like we need to like explain that free will is not fatalism, right? Like, do you, let's see if we want to get there yet. Let's not get there quite yet. So I'll say choice exists, right? We know choice exists. So we have the ability to make choice. There's no way we can say, oh, if I just stopped doing anything right now, all the exact same things in the future would happen, because there is no other path for things to happen. That is not what free will is saying in any way. It's what fatalism is saying. And I would say, if you really believe that, like go sit in a chair and do nothing and see how long that lasts for you. Like how long could you really do nothing before your body was like, we're going to do something now. Something's going to happen. But these meta theories are really important. So I want to ask, do you have any experience with really important meta theories in your world, in your life, or my version of meta theory?
Probably not. When I think about first of all, I cannot wait to get to what you're holding back on. This sounds juicy. It sounds controversial, so I can't wait. So when I think about this concept of free will, also, I mean, I think back to like the Greek and the Roman gods. They have like this pantheon of all these deities, and they represent different psychological states, war, lust, greed, all these different things. And today we think of gods as external, right? You have the Christian God or whatever, right? So he's up above the clouds or whatever in a golden throne. And but you could also think of gods as maybe something that possesses you. And maybe this is like even I think back to like the kind of classical Russian conception of love, and how they thought of, there's one way to look at love, which is that it's not necessarily a good thing or something to be desired, because it is a all-consuming possession of you. And so in the same way, these Greek and Roman gods, it's sort of the same thing. There was some sort of acknowledgement there that you're not always in charge. There's some sort of possession that can come over you. And having some sort of refined awareness of that is probably a good thing, that you have within you these impulses to run, to hide, to club something or someone over the head, to grab as many resources as you can, to do whatever. There are all these different impulses that are both informed by, evolutionary biology, by like deep cellular memory, and then also by more recent things, potentially trauma in your family line, trauma in your own childhood, to get it more recent. And so the question of free will, it's not this black and white thing. It is really a mixture. It's probably like a conscious battle that we all have to engage in, or not engage in, and then we can just sit around, like you say, and just wait and see what happens.
Yeah.
So maybe that's my meta theory for this.
So I'm super excited about this, because I'm going to actually take the position that the entire concept, like the concept of free will itself, doesn't even make sense in our universe. So we're going to have a differing perspective, which I think is going to be fun, and I'm excited about that.
Oh man.
So I want to dip back really quickly into this meta theory thing, because there are two meta theories. One you've already mentioned that's really important to me. Two meta theories. One is human physiology. And the interesting thing about human physiology is once you understand human physiology, once you understand the application of how our body moves and works and how the parts kind of integrate, you can essentially teach any type of movement. So if you understand human physiology, if you understand how the mechanics of the body works, you can teach yoga, you can teach powerlifting, you can teach gymnastics, you can teach CrossFit. Like you can teach any type of movement practice because you understand what is important in movement of the body. So you don't have to I don't have to understand powerlifting to teach somebody powerlifting because I understand how the body works. And that like once you understand this overarching capsule of how things work, then it explains all of the lower subsets. And you mentioned evolutionary biology, which is such a fascinating subject, and it's how this idea of free will really kicked off to me. So I sat down. I was talking to this PhD who is working with the UN on human rights. And we started talking about her perspective of the solution here. And it turned out that her starting point, the place that she grounded all of her thoughts and ideas from, came from a place that did not take into consideration biology. And I asked, right, because evolutionary biology used to be called evolutionary psychology and had to be changed to evolutionary biology because evolutionary psychology got so wrapped up in broken ideas that didn't make any sense and were not actually a part of evolutionary biology or psychology, that the name of the study was, or the name of the name of the field was ruined to the point that it had to be rebranded. So I started asking her about biology, right? And how, if we start with this idea that all humans across the board are exactly the same, that is counterintuitive to everything we know about biology. And I could get her there on every animal that wasn't human, which I thought was really fascinating. And then she followed it up with a dismissive, also, I've never taken a biology class. To which there are two inputs in things, right? The question of nature versus nurture is a logical fallacy because we cannot possibly, there's nothing that can possibly exist that doesn't have nature, right? We cannot possibly exist without a encapsulation of DNA, without some type of life. We cannot exist. And we cannot possibly exist without nurture, which is an environment. Nothing can exist without existing, and nothing can exist without an environment. There are no things. So those two things are always integrated, and they always exist together. Now, nature and nurture may have they like all things, essentially, they exist on some type of a scale, and they may impact us differently. But if you only have two inputs into an equation and you ignore one of those completely, you're going to have a very tough time getting to the proper solution. And I realized that's a pretty big problem. So if you are a PhD working on human rights and you are missing 50% of the equation, that is a problem. But it's not a problem. It's not on her effort. It's not on her intelligence. It's a problem that came from the fact that her education path never put her in the right position to have 50% of the equation of the problem she's trying to solve. And that's going to make solving those problems impossible. I believe that as an impossibility. So how does that relate to what on earth does that have to do with free will is a very fair question. I think the crux of the matter with free will is we are living in an experience of subjective reality, which means that we are feeling as if we have the information, all access to information, and all access to choice, and we can experience making choices, right? So if you go down a path that is about human rights education, and that becomes your passion and pure thing, you feel as if you are given all of the possibilities of knowing about human rights, because you've gone to this super elite school and you've taken in all of this super elite information from all of these super elite researchers. The reality is, though, we are living while as an individual we are living in a subjective experience, we are living in a very objective universe. And the experience of having choice doesn't necessarily mean that we have freedom of choice. So I'm going to get to all of this in a longer process. But let's start. Let's just to start walking it through. Can you confirm that you have had the experience of making a choice? Like, that is something that you can do.
I mean, my goodness, like I tend to think about these kinds of philosophic questions in the most practical way possible, because I have a good friend who just loves philosophy, and his whole life is sort of a mess. So it's interesting to see, and it's tragic, and it's interesting to see, like, if you're playing too much with just the ideas and the art, and like almost just like Plato's archetypes or something versus reality, there's a huge difference there. So do you have a choice? I mean, you should probably act like you have a choice. I mean, you could probably argue that people in some sense don't have a choice, but you do. Essentially, you're presented with at least a few options. Let's say fine, they're all sort of predetermined in some way, shape, or form. There are still probably some choices that are objectively better than others with respect to relieving suffering, creating more meaning, creating more joy, things like that. So in a very practical sense, I'd say sure, yeah, we definitely have some kind of free choice, free will, right?
So I think what I'm really excited about is I think this is a very practical, experiential, and logical. And I think so it's a path to get there, but I do think that we're going to practically walk down a logical path of individual experience to get there. That is my dream here. So I would argue that we absolutely have a choice, right? I right now have no hands up. I could choose to lift my left or right hand, and that is something I can do right now. So I could lift my right hand, and that happened, and I did it, and I could have lifted my left hand, but I lifted my right. And I think that is the subjective experience, is that I feel that I had this opportunity to make a choice. So I want to run through like a little deeper thought experiment here. And the first thing I want you to do is just clear your mind and then let any state, like think of any state, just any state in the United States that bubbles up. And just like, okay, so we have a state that pops up. For me, it's Missouri. I don't know why it's Missouri, but it's Missouri. Now, we're going to do this a couple more times, but what I want, like the really important thing is that you actually observe how the idea comes from your subconscious into your conscious. So it's like, we're going to think of a state again. And I just want you to watch how that actually happens, how the thought of the state transitions from a place that we have no awareness of into a place where we have awareness of. So we're just going to think of another state, and boom, it pops up, and we're like, okay, this idea of a state transferred over from a subconscious place into a conscious place. And then we're going to do that again, observing how this is happening, and we're just going to think of any city in the United States. And the city in the United States just bubbles up, and we're like, boom. Okay, from the subconscious to the conscious, and now I have a city. And then we're going to do this one more time, and we're going to observe how this pops up, and we're going to do this any city that is in England, and a city just bubbles up, right? For most of us, the city that bubbles up when we say think of a city in England is London. And if it wasn't London for you, it wasn't because you had free will. It was because you were exposed to other cities in England that weren't London. So you could not have possibly thought of a city in England that you weren't aware of. You can only think of those things that you are subconscious, that your subconscious has collected and made a part of you. So did you get that? So I want to start with you, Joel. Did you were you able to observe how the thought bubbles up from this place of zero awareness into a place of awareness?
Oh yeah. I mean, the state for me was Delaware, and it's because I just sent a check to someone in Delaware yesterday.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. I've never been to Delaware. I have no interest in Delaware. No offense to Delaware. Right. And it was the same thing with everything else you'd mentioned. I could just observe like, okay, it's related to something I was thinking of or something from prior experience in life.
And it has to be from something from a prior experience in life. There's no way we can think of something that we haven't had some type of prior awareness of. And that is a really interesting component of this that becomes important. But I also there's a deep question in this, and we have to really determine at what point a thought becomes conscious. So the definition of subconscious is beyond our awareness, right? Like we have clearly defined that the things that are going on in the subconscious portion of our brain, we are not aware of. But there is a moment in time when the subconscious offers up something, and it just like, it presents it to us. It is just like, here's a new thing. But we have absolutely no control over what our subconscious presents us. And I think that is the crux of where we start to get into this free will conversation. And you can kind of think of that. There's a pretty easy exercise that I can prove to you that you have no control over what pops up, and that will be bucket, goldfish, popcorn. So bucket, goldfish, popcorn. Now I want you can think of anything in the world, anything at all, but it cannot be bucket, goldfish, or popcorn. And we've likely already got to the point where bucket, goldfish, or popcorn, or bucket, goldfish, and popcorn have already popped up. So we don't have this control over what pops up from our subconscious, right? Like we can have an awareness of what does pop up, but the things that are presented to us are not are not under our control at any point. And to get a little bit more practical of what that means, if I ask you, Joel, what is your favorite color? What would it be?
Goodness, I don't have one, I suppose. It seems like a childish thing. I really don't have one, I don't think.
Okay. Let me try
we'll call
this.
it red. We'll call it red.
Let's call it red. That's perfect. So let's just say we have like our favorite color is red, but it could be essentially anything, right? There are essentially infinite colors that could be shades of different colors, et cetera, et cetera. But if we lived in a world where we were only ever exposed to blue and green, and I asked you, Joel, what is your favorite color? You could not possibly say red. You could only say either blue or green. And those guide rails are the thing. Those guide rails are the same thing that our subconscious offers us for what it presents to us. And by that I mean, we roll back to this city thing, right? Your subconscious is only a collection of the things that you have had some form of experience with. So you only can choose from the things that you have been exposed to.
So your PhD friend that you were talking to, instead of maybe going to school and studying human rights, perhaps, are you getting at the point that the better path would have been for her to just travel as much as possible to get as many different experiences possible that are outside of just a single kind of cultural program, and therefore you'd have a larger set of potential possibilities to select from?
So so I think in a way,
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah. So in a way, yes, right? In a way, absolutely. But also what I'm saying is she couldn't have possibly made any other decisions, right? So the I don't know if it's the final piece, but another very important piece in this is there is a chain of events that has led you to the person you are today. And all of those things have already happened. And each one of those things that has happened, including where you were born, who you were born to, who those ancestors are, and who those ancestors are, those all impact every choice that you have the capacity to make. And so you mentioned earlier, kind of this Roman Greek timeline. And if you were born in 300, if you were born anytime before 300 AD, right, into Roman society, the possibility that you would be Christian is essentially zero. You would have been some type of Greco-Roman religion that was very into spirits and that was very into gods like Jupiter and like there was a very different thing. After 300 AD, if you were born into Roman society, it is almost 100% you were Christian. Now that has nothing to do with you, right? It has to do with you were born at this time in this place. The likelihood that you or I spoke Japanese as our native language is essentially zero because we were born here, which means the likelihood that we could interact with some Japanese Zen teacher who only speaks Japanese is essentially zero. But that is only because of where we were born, who we were born to.
Oh, but I'm totally in control of whether I choose this political party or that political party.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
I think that whole thing's a genius trap too, where it's like, don't you understand they're both sort of on the same side?
Absolutely.
And it's
Absolutely.
on the opposite side of you. But
Yes,
anyways,
absolutely. And that again, right?
yeah,
That is the sensation of choice, the objective experience of choice within an objective reality, that you are so limited. You are limited to two colors essentially, and then as you said, those two colors are essentially working for the same people. So your objective experience of making choice is then this idea of, so that it feels within you as if you were doing something, but the objective reality is that it's all the same, and it all ends up being very similar in the end.
and we're living, I mean, specifically this time we're living in, it's very, and just with the media and the technology available, we're living in a time where there's a real push towards people to pick a side and to cancel their friendships with people that are on the other side. And and that's a fascinating thing. I mean, I have a few friends from childhood that I have, I guess, you could say maybe significant differences with in temperament and in views of what's happening today, but we can have like a conversation where we can come at this in a respectful way, and I can actually not be a childish person, which sometimes I would tend to be, and just just send some memes or something and try to dunk on a person or whatever, but instead like really try to force myself to have some humility and understand that there's probably some stuff I don't know, and this person I'm talking with knows things that I don't, and I should probably figure out what it is they know, and maybe vice versa. Maybe I could potentially influence them a bit, but really my goal should be to seek understanding from them, and to not just send childish memes. But I mean, and with the free will thing, I mean, we've talked about this before too, where it's, so okay, you live back, you're born in Roman times, and before a certain date you believe in one reality, and after a certain date you believe in another one, and you are a Christian or you're a Mohammedan or whatever it is. But today it's almost like people have really figured out the science of and a creation of reality, and the creation of that reality through language and through persuasion to a way that it is like weaponized science and psychology in a sense. And so that really, it gives people this false sense of certainty and of a false sense of control. And I feel it and I see it in myself, where I must be in control of my thoughts. I must know what it is and what I think must be correct, and I'm on the right side of this thing. But just the fact that they're trying to frame it so hard, division, embarrassingly simplistic. Like it's such a unsophisticated racket that's being run on us, and yet it's working so damn well, it seems like.
It is working.
Or at least they're telling us that it's working well, and maybe we're believing that. Maybe it isn't working that well. Maybe there are a lot of people who have nuanced thoughts and opinions, but they don't want to share those in public because the risk that may present, and you don't want to be confronted or challenged. But it's easy to be manipulated by the crowd, by politicians, by ad men, and just by the culture at large here.
And we are all, so I think, to expand upon that a little bit, my point is that we are all manipulated. We are all constrained. The choices that we have are constrained by the experiences we've had personally, and the experiences our ancestors have had, right? If my dad's great grandfather hadn't left Ireland and come to the United States, everything I couldn't exist, right? I do not exist if that doesn't happen. but everything within the lineage of my being is also dramatically different. So my life today, the reason I am sitting here today, has to do with the fact that my dad's great grandfather left Ireland, and the fact that his lineage made it to Ireland has to do with the fact that his lineage and his great grandfather left somewhere else and ended up on a crazy island that like is a wild place. So
if if you were still there, you'd have to pick different sides and be Protestants or Catholics.
yes, yes. Well,
a whole different set of realities.
And interesting enough, right? Like the one of the most fascinating things about the battles in Ireland, these religious battles in Ireland, is they have turned off people to religion. Like Ireland is like one of the places where religion is dying the quickest, a place where there has been constant war over religion. People are just like, I'm done with it. I don't want this anymore. I don't want to be involved at all. And that wouldn't be happening if there hadn't been hundreds and hundreds of car bombings killing people over essentially the same ideologies. Now, that doesn't happen everywhere, right? There are plenty of places where people are still battling about religion. But the fact that it's happening in Ireland has to do with all of the suffering that has gone on by people in the past. People would not be dropping religion the way they are if religious people hadn't been killing people the way they've been killing people in Ireland for so long. So you touched on this point, and I think I just want to extrapolate this out a little bit more, which is the idea that our thoughts are constrained by our experiences, that the subconscious can only present us things that we have awareness of, means that everyone that you know is experiencing that same thing. And that if someone has some thought bubbling up from their subconscious into a place of this like experiential portion of their brain, it doesn't mean that they're a bad person, right? It doesn't mean that they're a horrible being. It means that they've had a completely different past linkage of events that have created the ability to make choices for them today. And they are only presented with the choices that are available within the constraints of what their subconscious can present to them. And their subconscious can only present what they've been exposed to. So there's a set of compassion. There is a deep-seated compassion for humans within this idea that everyone is making choices, yes, but only from what they have available to make choices from. And if you were only given the choices of red or blue, you cannot possibly expect someone to make the choice of green because it's not a possibility within their brain. And that level of awareness about others around us, I think, is a huge, huge step forward in connecting and like regrouping people into something that can be better.
Yeah, I like where you've gone with that. When I have these conversations with people and I'm taking the heretic position on something, often I'll say to them, look, I'm not completely possessed. I am teachable. I am willing to accept other ideas. And I think about, as you talk about this, you have you have these sets of choices available to you, but the sets of choices available to you are informed by your past. I mean, I think about how maybe the reasons that I tend to be a contrarian and a heretic goes back to probably my own childhood, definitely in dealing with supposed experts and authorities when it came to my oldest son, who's got autism, and dealing with that and trying to help him as much as possible, and just seeing the absolute failure of like the available, cookie cutter solutions that are available to you as a parent. And so, but then other people that I talk with who maybe haven't had those experiences, maybe I should just have some empathy for them. It's like, well, they're just living their life. They just want to be happy. And maybe I'm the a-hole because I'm always like looking for what's wrong, looking for what can be improved. That's a fascinating thing. Trying to think of where to take this from here. There's a great book. There's a few interesting books around this. One is a book called It Didn't Start With You, How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who We Are, and something like, and how to break that cycle, something like that. I haven't read that book. Someone mentioned it to me because of something that their spouse had been dealing with, but you really can see how it's not. Oh, okay, fine. So I'll accept what you say, Patrick. We've got like a limited range of choices here. Let's accept that. Totally buy it. I can see it. So to get to a book and an author and a speaker that you like, what's his name?
Sadhguru.
Sadhguru, right?
Yeah.
So I had this book just for the people listening here. I had this book on my phone on Audible. I sent a screen cap to you, Patrick. I was like, hey, is this the guy you've been talking about? I got this book, Inner Engineering.
Inner Engineering, yeah.
And so I started listening to that again after you'd mentioned this topic of free will. He talks in there about responsibility, and what that word means and what it means. It's not a drag. Responsibility isn't like, oh, I've got to take out the trash, which you do, and I've got to job and feed the family and feed myself and clean the toilet. Sure, it's all that stuff, but responsibility, responsible, response-able. You are able to respond. And so fine, let's say you do have a limited number of ways to respond to something. That's definitely true. And some people have a much larger range than others because of their experiences, but we all need to at least decide at some point or work on becoming more able to respond, to make things better. So what are your thoughts on that? You know way more about him than I do. What are your thoughts on all of this?
So one of the things that I've loved about studying this from both a biological perspective and a spiritual perspective, right, is that you are 100% right. Like you can read the like biological components from Sam Harris, and you can read the spiritual components from Sadhguru, and they both work perfectly with this idea of free will. And that I think is really important. I think the most important thing about that piece from Sadhguru is this ability to respond. And the thing that it took me a year to understand that concept, right? Because what Sadhguru says literally is you are responsible for everything. And he means like you, Patrick Brennan, are responsible for World War II. And how this thing that existed before I was alive, I have any type of responsibility for, feels really hard to integrate into your brain, or it felt really hard for me to integrate into my brain. But the ability to respond to something, which is something we all have, and not only something we have, but something we want. Like, I think this actually answers the idea of why this is such a sensitive topic, is because people will hear this idea of you don't have free will, and they think it is therefore restraining their ability to respond. And while it is saying there is a defined set of parameters with you can respond from, it is not saying you can't respond. It is saying that you have a certain set of skills, you have a certain set of ability, you have a certain set of recognition that you can choose to respond from. And it's the sensation of responding that is actually equivalent to freedom, right? That's the thing Sadhguru says. It's like, hey, if we wanted to torture you, we would just put you in a place where we would tie you up and you have no ability to respond to things that are happening. the worst thing you can do to someone is take away their ability to respond to the things that are happening within their life, right? If we tied you up, put you on a computer screen, and just like made you watch that horrible things were happening, you would feel terrible. But if you had the ability to get up and do something, you would feel better. Like the ability to get up and take action, to do things to impact the way things are happening is pure freedom. And that is, I think, that is the point that I took out of a year of thinking about what Satguru really meant when he said, hey, you are responsible for everything, not just on this world, in this universe, in the universe that you are not even yet aware of. You have the ability to respond to those things as soon as they become part of your awareness.
So, yeah, that is a hard concept. I think the ability to respond is so important. I mean, if you just cartoonify this whole thing and say, well, okay, I have no free will, then it's not my responsibility what I do. I can just let my vices run rampant all over my life. That's probably a horrible thing as well. That was another thing I was thinking about as you mentioned this topic was what happens if you, in just a simplified way, accept that you have no free will. Does that may just give you this excuse to just give into your selfish impulses, and that certainly is not what this is about at all.
It's the opposite.
And yet, yeah, it's for sure. And yet in some ways to recognize that you still in some sense don't have control over everything, and you've got a lot of biology, you got millions of years of biology informing your impulses. And so I think there's something to be said for like a bit of self-acceptance with where you are at, with what potential options you have to respond with, and whatever your vices are, to maybe give some thought to those, decide if they are something you can manage, if they're okay, or if they are ultimately destructive. And I mean, I don't know. It's interesting. Every culture, you talk about your Irish heritage. I have some of that as well, Western European descendants and all of that. And every culture though has different vices, I would say, and different ways of handling the human condition. We have, the cartoonified Irish people, they all drink. Maybe some of them are bards who like to rant and rave all the time as well about these ideas. I don't know we've been talking about like working towards these higher ideals with our responses, but what are your thoughts on managing your shadow material and maybe your vices and all of that with respect to free will, or fate as it is?
Yeah. So I think that, I think there is a huge difference between fatalism and determinism, right? And what I mean, determinism is like we can make choices from a predetermined range of available choices. But why this understanding of free will is really important is it doesn't free you from the fact that you do make choices. You do make choices. They are just constrained by what you have available. But the understanding of that also implies that every single choice you make is going to have an impact on how the potential of your future choices. So it doesn't free you from the responsibility of making good choices, right? You can't just say, oh, there's no free will, so I can whatever. I can smoke weed all day and just like party it up like whoever, right? Coolio. I don't know if Coolio smokes weed or not, but let's hope he does.
Man. Snoop.
Yes.
Come on.
Right. Like, so So it doesn't free you. It doesn't free you from the possibility. I wanted Afro Man. That's who I was looking for because he has the song, right? So I was going for Afro Man. That's where I was trying to get, but
Nice.
my brain couldn't get there. But so my point is that every choice you make, even though the parameters of that choice were constrained, the next choice will be impacted by the previous choice. Now, you can only make the choice in the moment from this constrained place. But if that constrained place pushes you just a little bit further in one direction or the other, or expands you in a little bit more, the constraint upon the next choice will be different. And it may be a larger constraint and maybe a smaller constraint. So if you are constantly making choices that are shrinking your position, and this is the thing that I wasn't headed towards, but I think you brought it up and it's really valuable, is that if you are constantly making choices that are shrinking your field of vision, that are shrinking your awareness, the choices, the space that you can make choice from will be getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and will be more and more directed in whatever direction you have pointed yourself into. So there's not, like, it doesn't absolve the responsibility of choice. It makes the responsibility of choice even more important to understand that you don't have freedom of any choice. You have freedom of what you've made available to you and what has been made available to you previous to anything you've ever done.
I like this. The thing that I took away from that responsibility and able to respond rant from Satguru had to do with reality creation, really.
Yeah.
For yourself, for your life, and for those around you as well, that the real game here is reality creation. And maybe, and you have a limited set, I guess, of choices to some degree, determinism, all that. But I definitely see that as I've been pushing that reality creation over the past several years, I can see how it is expanding available choices to a larger degree. And that's a pretty incredible thing. It doesn't happen overnight, but just to accept that, to take that responsibility on.
Yeah.
And I would say it's like a very almost like a psychedelic kind of reality to inhabit, to just realize in some ways that you can manifest things. Like, the manifestation takes time. Thank God it takes time, because if it happened immediately, all like the garbage negative thoughts in my head would just like mean that I was just dead in like half a second. Because so thank God it takes a while for you to manifest what it is you want. And even if you're moving in the wrong direction, thank God that doesn't immediately manifest itself, and maybe you have time to pull yourself out of a nosedive or out of a dark alleyway.
Yeah.
But it is such a powerful thing. And I think that the kind of the controlling components of the culture would like you to just pick a side and not really do much else, not really think about things very deeply.
Sure.
Because that certainly is a painful and oftentimes disillusioning exercise to engage in. And it's going to, in some ways, separate you from other people if you're not careful, because then you can, it's harder to relate. You've now focused yourself where there's a smaller group of people who have those interests and who you can relate with. You can't have these types of conversations with everyone. Not everyone wants to have them. And as you said, and as your experience, I guess, has informed you, some people just really do not like it. They recoil from that. And then that really can, I mean, I've seen this in like the headlines of the culture, where it's like, oh, this famous person had to cancel their friendships with other people because of their views or what they did with their own body and stuff. And it's like, this is a fascinating thing where I almost feel like they would like this they would like this to happen. They would like the division. And I use they, I know that's so silly and cartoonified, but it's real. Like there is there's something here, whether it's intentional or just an emergent property of social media and of people's tendencies. But this division is getting so much stronger. And so your ability to respond to that in a way where you create a reality that is more connected, more growth oriented, more, and it gives you more optionality in your life. It's so important. It's so important today.
I think it's interesting because we've essentially made it back to the question that started today's podcast, which is like, what can you do? And I think maybe I have a better answer now, which is like, think about the ways that you can be constructive in disagreements. Think about the ways that you can be inclusive in ideologies, and maybe within disagreement, start out by finding out where what actually aligns and agrees, right? Because the reality is most of us probably have pretty similar desires, and we may have different thoughts on the paths to get to those desires, but I do believe that the majority of humans want pretty similar things. And that is because of evolutionary biology. We have very similar needs. Our brains are designed to want very similar things. So we likely all want pretty similar things, but we may have been exposed to different paths to get there.
So I think it helps. Absolutely. I think it helps to determine some kind of ideal or some kind of goal. It can be small, it can be large, but then instead of demanding that others create that, you should actually figure out, how do you do that yourself in some small way? Because that is the hardest but most effective thing to do. If you're asking for the solution from the authorities, they'll have a solution for you. You really won't like it once it's delivered. You really won't, guaranteed. You can see that. You can just see that everywhere. I mean, oftentimes you have a large scale, complex social system, and whatever the thing is, whatever the name of the thing is, it's going to have the opposite of the intended consequence, almost always, just almost always. And you even, I mean, if you're just really cynical, you look at like the names of, different government bills.
For sure. First thing that comes to mind.
You look at the Patriot Act, hilarious. So things like that. I mean, you look at anything, you just look at the name of it, it will have the opposite of the intended consequence almost always. And so I think to demand that others do it for you is probably something maybe we even just get from childhood imprinting, where, mom's going to do it for us, dad is going to take care of it, grandma's going to take care of it for us, big brother, big sister's going to do it for us, the teacher's going to do it for us. But trying to actually push towards something yourself, hard as hell. Way more exciting though, way more fun.
Yeah. Do you feel like we've left any giant gaps?
Probably. I don't know. I don't think I'm even smart enough to know that, right? Or self-aware to know that, right? And it's deterministic, right? I've got just a small window of experience. So I don't know. I'm sure there are people listening to this just screaming right now, thinking, you've missed this, you've missed that. So we have. So please leave a question or let us know.
Hit us with a follow-up on that. If we've left giant gaps, it would be fun to know where they are.
Yeah.
Any last? Tell me.
Hey, you've been getting more requests for different episode topics, so that's great. I think we're gonna do that. We'll do a listener requested theme
Yeah.
for the next episode.
Yeah. Okay. That'd be fun. Yeah. Listener requests on themes are great. Yeah. What a fun opportunity. Talk about something that somebody wants to hear about. Joel, thanks, man.
Thanks a lot.
Cool.
All right, man. That was good.
That was pretty good. That was an interesting, very interesting, very different experience for me. I think it went a different direction than you expected. Yeah.
That was cool. Yeah, which I like. I don't like being in charge of it. It's good.
Good. Cool. Anything good going on in your world?
All sorts of things, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, man, it's all good right now. Lots of rain, taking people out in the woods, teaching them how to identify different edible mushrooms. So that's good to
I got to
pass
do
that
that.
along to folks.
I want to get on your schedule.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're out there. What have you got? You got aspens, you got ponderosas.
It's mostly aspen, and we're mostly pinyon where I am.
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, if you're out there and you see stuff and you don't know what it is, take pictures, and then I can at least get a sense for what you have out there.
Okay.
And we can go from there.
Okay. I'll do that.
Yeah, man.
I will do that. Cool, man. Well, enjoy the heck out of the weekend. We'll touch base soon, I'm sure.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you.
All right. See you, Patrick.
See ya.